to Struggles of the Spirit. I'm your host, Reverend Lee Udell, and I'm glad you tuned in to listen to us today. We're a little different because we have a greater depth of background here with our special guest, Bill Harwood. He's a long-time resident of Burlington, and he's been around the world, literally in many different ways. And so he's sitting right here.
Good morning, Bill.
Oh, good morning, folks. Nice to be here.
Glad to be here.
So I really mean it, that if you have something you want to say, you don't have to be polite and wait to be called upon. You can just speak out and say you want to be heard, and we'll listen to you. We'd like to hear what your perspective is.
The number is 651-0589.
Most TV shows don't want to hear what you have to say. They want to just hear what their guests have to say. But here we're different. We want to have a real two-way rapport. So be honest with us and tell us how you see us and what your issues are. I grew up in Ossining, New York. Sing Sing prison is famous there. And so I have a different kind of background than many of you. And Bonnie grew up in another part of the world.
Yes. Hi, I'm Bonnie Douglas. I'm Lee Udell's assistant, and I grew up here in the Champlain Valley, down in Shoreham. And our guest today, Bill Harwood. Bill, where did you grow up?
I was born in the Mary Fletcher Hospital in 1946. My father was a doctor at the medical school and at the hospital. His family came from Dorset and Teignmouth Pond.
Sounds very charming, Teignmouth Pond.
Very charming.
It was my grandmother, Emmeline Moranville, and his father, Elmer Harwood, was the mailman for the town of Dorset. So my father grew up working on farms and working at the Dorset Field Club as a caddy. And my mother grew up in Manchester, just south of Manchester, on a farm that her family had homesteaded in the 1760s.
Homesteaded?
Wow. Now what does that mean, homestead?
Well, they were the original white settlers who came up from Massachusetts and New Hampshire first, and the farm is still in the family.
Hey, that's unusual.
And it is still a working farm. My sister lives there, and I have a cousin, Hamilton, who raises sheep and hay on the farm, and he has a few beef cattle, so 7th generation Vermonter.
7, that's wonderful. I think I can only claim 5.
Well, you're unique though, Bonnie. There are not too many Bonnies around.
Not too many, not too many.
But in my father's family, education was important, so he and 2 of his brothers came to Burlington to go to medical school. One of them, Uncle Charles, is Charles Harwood of Harwood Union High School, and he was a doctor in Waterbury, and my father was a doctor here, and Uncle Donald went to medical school here, and he moved to South Carolina. So I have family in South Carolina.
So the medical world has been important to your family.
Very much so, but wasn't for me.
You're not a doctor.
I was a pre-med for a while, but I didn't enjoy all those science courses. But my father was at the UVM Medical School, and he was the founder of the Burlington Free Dispensary, which is no longer there. It was downtown by the Unitarian Church. He went to the city of Burlington and said, I think we should offer free care to the citizens of Burlington who can't afford it, and to make it part of the medical school so the medical students can have training with patients instead of just learning out of a book or in a laboratory. So he started that program.
That's great. So he had a residency program of his own.
Right.
That's what we would call it these days.
It was the first clinical training that the medical students have, and I have spoken with a couple of his former students who went through this program.
What did they have to say?
How much they loved it, how much they got out of it. Because my father loved being a teacher.
I bet he was a good one.
He used to come home and show us these little tricks that he had used for physical diagnosis, you know, how people limp or what they do when they get certain diseases, and that was always a highlight of the day when he'd do his imitations of disease.
What a great way to learn, though. What a great way to learn. And then you said you went to medical school for a while. Did you stay around in this area?
Well, my father was at the university medical school here, and in 1953 I gave up house on Cliff Street and Adams School to move to Grand Forks, North Dakota.
Grand Forks, that's a far piece from Adams School, what? Don't you think?
Yes, my Adams School sweatshirt didn't get much use out in North Dakota. It was a completely different atmosphere. The soil was rich, and my father loved to garden, so he got a lot of experience growing fabulous vegetables. And it was a great place to grow up, and we lived there for 15 years.
15 years, all right.
15 years on the prairie.
Yeah. What took your family there?
Well, my father was looking for a medical school where he could be the dean because he wanted to move up in the academic world, and there was an opening, so.
Wow, so he got the job.
He got the job.
Neat. Neat.
And so how old were you then when you moved?
I was 7.
7? And how was the move for you?
I didn't mind. I mean, I was 7, but my sister was going to Edmonds at the time, and she was in high school, and it was difficult for her. Because she had to leave behind her friends, Marjorie Rowell, the daughter of Lyman and May Rowell, who lived on Cliff Street, and Pam Terrian. She was the daughter of the Terrians that lived down the street from us, and Selby Newquist, and a whole lot of Burlington people. So it was kind of tough for her.
Tough for her, right.
And my brother, he adjusted very well.
Good.
What made it possible for him to adjust?
He was in the 5th grade, and he wasn't that much settled into Adams School. We adjusted to very difficult winters, and that does something to you when you have 30 and 40 degree below zero weather, and the winds blow all winter, and you have dirt and snow all the time, and you have 12-foot snowbanks around your house. A little tougher than Burlington.
Why is it that we don't have those kinds of weather conditions?
I don't know, but I recall in 1997 they had 5 weekends in a row with major blizzards. And
Wow.
major flood there. So a great deal of my childhood there has been obliterated. My elementary school is gone. My church was flooded out, and it's been bought and sold a couple of times. The house I grew up in was flooded badly, and there was a lot of destruction, I think. But
So you were near a river, was a river? Or?
right near the Red River of the North. But it was a great place to grow up.
What makes you say that?
Well, because we went to public schools where we had a great deal of music. I had 5 hours of music every day when I was in high school.
That's a lot.
What a joy.
5 hours I played the French horn, and I sang, and that laid the foundation for what I'm doing now here in Burlington.
So you were in Burlington, and then you left, and then you came back.
Came back 3 years ago.
What brought you back?
Well, because I'd been in the Foreign Service and living overseas for 20 years, and I'd been away in the Army and in graduate school, come back to Burlington for maybe 15 minutes, then go down to my mother's farm and stay there. And so Vermont was always a place where we went to visit the relatives. And then about 5 years ago, I told my wife, who's not from here, I said, let's go be tourists.
I like the way you said that.
Let's be tourists in Vermont and see the things like Ben & Jerry's and Cabot cheese. I said, I've never seen these things. I don't know what they are. So I told my cousin Brian in Waterbury, I said, we want to be tourists. And he told me what to do. Yes, you do what your cousins tell you. So
Yes.
he's older than me, and he's older and smarter than me. And after we'd been tourists in Vermont for 3 days, my wife said to me, I think I could live here.
Aha.
And where did you say she was from?
She grew up in the Hudson Valley near Hudson, New York, just north of Bard College.
Okay,
That's
not
it.
terribly far away.
See, I grew up in Ossining, New York, which was in the Hudson Valley.
The home of the Mary Knoll fathers.
Right, right. In fact, I used to, for my stamp collection, I used to go to the Mary Knoll sisters and get postage stamps. And it was great fun.
So when she said that she'd like to live here, I figured that's all I needed to hear. So we went to Lunig's and had an earnest discussion and decided to move out of Washington, D.C. and come back here.
Well, welcome back.
I love it.
That's great. Now tell me, you're not living on Cliff Street, are you?
Just around the corner.
Oh, that would have been lovely juxtaposition if you'd been on back to Cliff Street.
Well, 55 Cliff Street had undergone a couple of changes, but the Carpenters lived there for 40 years, and Dot Carpenter goes to our church, College Street. So
you're very well connected back at Cliff Street then.
And the house was being rented at the time, so we bought a house around the corner.
That's good.
So I'd like to drive down. Make sure that the street is still in good condition.
It's a good street.
It is. It has a charming title, Cliff Street.
And you don't drive up from South Willard Street in the winter.
True.
Go down to Main Street.
True.
You remember your lessons well.
I take my lessons wherever I can.
Good.
And certainly growing up in Vermont and North Dakota taught me your life is what you make it. You take what it offers. You don't expect too much, and when good things happen, you're grateful and you take advantage of them. And tomorrow you could have a blizzard, so
We could.
You could.
We could.
so
Well, there's a question that you're an outsider, and I'm curious what happened to get the farmers to sell their cows and to give up farming, basically.
Vermont is cursed with beautiful scenery and bad soil, so it's very difficult. I mean, I have two cousins who went into farming. One is a dairy farmer, the other has a farm in Addison County, and it's a tough way to make a living. And the third cousin who does the farming in Manchester, it's economies of scale. That's one thing you notice if you drive through Wisconsin or Iowa or Illinois, the farms out there are much larger and much more efficient than anything in Vermont. So there's this great tension between what is economically viable in Vermont and what sort of resources can you expect the state to put into the farm industry, because it is an industry.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a major issue.
That's a good point.
We used to be famous for our sheep and, here in Vermont, but that was a long time ago.
Yeah, that was the end of the 1800s, first part of the 1900s.
Yeah, my grandfather's farm had a lot of sheep. They had hundreds of sheep there, and they did very well during the Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
And my cousin carries on the family tradition. He still raises sheep.
That's great. Now, does he do the shearing and the
No,
processing?
a shearer comes through.
And then does he ship his fleece off to be processed, or does
I
he
don't
do it
know.
himself?
I don't
Ooh.
know what he does with it. I think the
Oh.
shearer takes it. I just.
Oh, that's something we'll have to find out.
But no, what this kind of background did, it gave me a grounding experience, which after I left the States and I was in the Foreign Service and I lived overseas for about 20 years, it gave me a completely different perspective from the people I was with generally, my fellow Americans, and then from the people in our host countries. And then it gave me a completely different perspective of what the United States is about. And one of the first lessons I learned was I'd been a student in Poland. This was communist times, when they had the secret police, we had food shortages, there was censorship, it was under Russian occupation. And I'd had some difficulties there, and my father had come over to help me out, and I'd been through some very, very difficult times. And my mother said, "Oh, well, no, we'll talk about that another time." So I said, "Well, okay." And we had some company in the house, and we put that off. And then a couple of days later, we had some relatives in for lunch, and I mentioned something about living in this communist country. And then my uncle started telling about a lawsuit that was brought against the town where he lived, and how terrible it was that this person had sued the town.
Aghast.
And he was horrified because he was a select man, and it cost $10,000 to defend the town. And this shouldn't be allowed, and on, and he was very upset. And I said, well, I just came from a place where you wouldn't even consider that, because the people don't have the freedom like that. And I said, we should be appreciative of the freedoms we have in the States, because most places in the world don't have the freedoms we take for granted. My mother was very upset, and she called me out of the room, and she took me aside, and she said, "Now, you are being extremely rude."
Oh, no.
And I said, "Rude? But Mother, I'm just talking about how wonderful our country is, and how we have freedoms that the rest of the world would love to have, but don't have." And she said, "Those people live there because they want to live there, and that's what they want. And we have our way of doing things, and I don't want to hear any more talk about this."
Wow.
Ooh.
So,
Subjects.
and in fact that is true, because I found most people really don't want to hear. And you can talk to a lot of people who've lived overseas, had overseas experience, and they come back, and I hear it all the time, whether they're business people or they're academics or it's different when you live and work overseas as opposed to being a tourist.
That would be true.
So they don't want to hear that other places are better, other places are worse. No, they just, let's worry about the schools and the water and the airport and the taxes. And okay, that's the way it is here.
Yeah. There are a lot of people that feel that way, and then there's some of us, fortunately, like you, that are curious and willing to go and live and learn and do some work there. What was your work when you were there?
When I was in graduate school, this time when I was living in Poland, some friends said, "Well, what are we going to do when we finish? We're all going to have these graduate degrees in Polish history. What good are they?" "Well, they're no good. But you can take an exam and join the Foreign Service." And I said, "I didn't know what that was." And they said, "Oh, you just take the exam." But I was good at taking exams, so I took the exam and I passed and I got a job.
All right.
So I was very grateful. And, it wasn't as though I wanted to be a diplomat or anything. It just happened to work out. So I had this job. And, so I just lived overseas, and I was in what was called the U.S. Information Agency, which was part of the Foreign Service of the United States. We were separate from the State Department at that time. So in the press side, we did press relations with embassies, so I got to know the journalists who would come through. The first week I was in Bangladesh, my first tour, we had the Japanese Red Army hijacked a plane and they brought it down in the Bangladesh Dhaka airport. That was my first exposure to journalists. All these journalists started asking me all about this hijacking, and I didn't know what was going on. So I learned very quickly how journalists operate, what their demands are, and then what I could do in my position as a press person. It was all, I learned very quickly what to do. And then on the other side, we had cultural programs. We ran libraries overseas. For example, when I lived in Mogadishu, Somalia, I was the director of the only public library in the country.
Wow.
And when the Civil War started, my library was the first place the rebels went to burn all the books.
Oh, yes. Well, that's where the information is. That's where the reach outside is. Yeah.
Because they believed that all these books were haram and had to be destroyed, so they had a big bonfire and burned all the books.
Wow, they really did.
But
It reminds me of Adolf Hitler's day,
same thing, same idea.
burn the books.
But then we also did Fulbright exchange programs. People have heard of the Fulbright program.
Sure.
Send lecturers and researchers and performers overseas and bring people here to the States. St. Mike's has them, UVM has them. And so one of the things I would do is arrange lecture programs and seminars for these visiting Fulbrighters who would come through. And we also did a lot with performing artists who would come through.
Oh, great.
I really enjoyed that.
Oh, bad, yes. Yeah.
As I tell people, when I was living in Kathmandu, we got a commercial telegram that the Brigham Young University young ambassadors were coming. We didn't know anything about this except, well, they'll be here in a week, get ready. So my boss said, it's your project. So I learned how to hire a hall. I learned how to arrange everything connected with staging a concert.
And that's what they were there for, all right.
And that's what they were there for, and it was amazing. I had to arrange the housing and the bus. I had to do everything. So that's what I'm doing here in Burlington with organizations I belong to. I do a lot of concert organizing, and I do that at my church, for example.
Mm-hmm. And which church is that?
College Street Congregational Church. It was my parents' church. I was baptized there.
All right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That helped me get a security clearance in the Army to prove that I was born in Burlington.
Your baptismal
My
record.
baptismal
That was an official ID. That's
official
great.
ID, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That was when it was during the days when we had looking for communists everywhere, and I remember
I'm sorry, what? I'm sorry, what did
we were
you
looking for communists,
Mm-hmm.
and
Thank you.
and College Street Church was mentioned as a place where communists were hiding.
Really?
Really?
Yeah.
I'll have to ask Pat Morgan, our historian, about that.
That would be interesting information, yes.
Well, did I hear our time was about up?
We've got about 4 more minutes, yes.
4 more minutes.
Mhm. But yes, we're going to be only a half an hour today with our show.
Well, we usually have a whole hour show, but we have been limited by the mafia.
No, not the mafia, but there are other constraints on our time. Is there anything particular you'd like to ask Bill as we close the show? Or Bill, is there anything particular you'd like to add?
Well, I understand better now that I've been living here 3 years what my father and mother enjoyed about Burlington, what they got out of it, what remains in Burlington that is still very important to my family is still very important to me. And it's wonderful when I meet people like Arthur Coonan, who was one of my father's students, or Dr. John Tompas, one of my father's students, and to hear about him from a different perspective, what Burlington used to be like and what Burlington is like today. There are certain things I was allowed to do when I was a little boy that I can now do. For example, Pine Street, could never go to Pine Street.
Why?
Why not?
My mother never told me, but we didn't go beyond Pine Street.
Isn't that interesting? Oh.
That was it, all those factories,
Oh, true. Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Dangerous for a little boy.
Ah.
And
But now you can go proudly and happily.
I can go everywhere. I remember the couple of days after the Valentine's Day blizzard, when we were first back in Burlington and our house was being worked on, I went to Speeder and Earl's on Pine Street, and I came out. I almost cried.
Oh.
Because it was blue sky, they had plowed the roads, I had great coffee,
Oh.
I had a place to live,
Mhm.
I could see the lake. What more do you want?
What more do you want? That's beautiful.
That's Burlington.
That's beautiful. Yes.
It is.
Yes.
Well, I guess we need to invite you again. Would you come again and talk with us?
Oh, I'll have to talk to my dog about it. She's out in the car and she's wondering where I am. See if she can put up with us again.
Well, we hope she can. Yes, because I would like to hear more about your foreign service too,
Oh,
and the places you've been and the people you've met.
those Mary Knowles from Ossining.
Oh, yes.
And yep, and lead the Jesuits you were mentioning earlier that the two of you have in common.
Right,
Mhm.
right.
Mm-hmm.
The Ossining and Mary Knowles used to go ice skating in the wintertime locally in Ossining. And they would wear their cassocks, black cassocks, and with their skates. And very romantic.
Oh, that would have been a beautiful sight.
Yes.
Great.
Well, thank you for coming to us.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Here our music is
Yeah.
telling us we're finished. So
Thank you very
So-
much, Bill.
It's my pleasure.
invite us to one of the countries you were at.
Yeah. Yes, we'd like to go to one of the countries. Yes.
Let
Maybe
me
you could
think.
come talk about it.
Which one do you want to go to?
Well, Norway, where I was, my parents came from Norway originally.
Were you up in that part of the world at all?
I married a Norwegian.
Aha.
Right. Then you two.
In North Dakota, do we have Norwegian?
In North Dakota, of course, you have Norwegians.
We got plenty.
Right.